We are at the 7:05 mark, so for those of you who have showed up on time, I think we are ready to go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hope you and your families are all well. Today we have representatives from the Black BigLaw Pipeline who are going to lead essentially a workshop for us, helping us to prepare for on-campus interviews, some strategies for success and best practices. Here with us, we have Morgan Mouchette, who's a partner at Rome. We have Roy Prather, who's a partner at Beveridge Diamond, who's not here yet, but will be joining us shortly. We have Naeem Harris, who's an associate at Vincent and Elkins. We have Brittany McCant, who's an associate at Goodwin Procter. And we have Jen Kent, who's a senior associate at Latham and Watkins. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And Roy, I will turn it over to you. Just as a matter of format, if you have questions, please send them directly to me via the chat function. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and I will do my best to get all of the questions into the attorneys that we have with us today and get your questions answered. So thanks again for being with us.
Thanks, Jalen, and good evening, everyone. As he said, my name is Roy Prather, and along with my colleagues, we are all faculty and members of the Black BigLaw Pipeline, and we are going to be sharing with you some tips and strategies about how to approach on-campus interviewing, pitfalls, as well as successful steps that you can take to best position yourself. Just a quick note about who we are. The Black BigLaw Pipeline is a nonprofit that a number of us all created and have been involved in to promote positive outcomes for Black attorneys working in large law firms through training, mentorship, and career planning. It's a community of Black lawyers around the country that serve as resources to one another in navigating the large law firm space, whether you're a summer associate at a law firm or a young lawyer out of law school just getting started. And so we are very excited to be with all of you and share some strategies that have been successful for us and others who are members of the pipeline, and things that we've seen as attorneys that have participated in interviewing people in on-campus interviews, and what's worked well, and what preparation you can make to ensure that you're one of those people who are successful in the on-campus interviewing process. So Jalen already introduced us. I'll ask the speakers that are here to just give a very quick blurb about what you actually do, starting with Morgan.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Morgan Mouchette. I'm a partner in the matrimonial and family law group at Rome, based out of their New York office. I've been practicing since 2011 and am a member of my firm's recruiting committee and a member of the hiring committee for the Rome Diversity Scholars Program, which is our diversity recruiting initiative. It's great to be here with you guys.
Thanks, Morgan. Brittany?
Nice to be here with you guys. My name is Brittany McCants. Garcia is my legal name. I got married. I have been practicing since 2011 as well. I specialize in executive compensation and employee benefits. In short, no one knows what that is. It's a small subsector of tax, corporate governance, and securities that sits under the corporate groups. And no, I did not know what that was when I was a law student in your shoes. I have been doing this for the last 6 years exclusively, and I am happy to be here and to share the wisdom that I've gotten over the years in doing hiring committee work and diversity work and working with recruitment over the years.
Thanks, Brittany. And Jen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Kent. I'm a 7th-year associate at Latham Watkins in the Washington, D.C. office. I'm a member of the private equity finance group, which basically means I represent borrowers in loan transactions, usually to help pay for an M&A deal. So I'm definitely a transactional lawyer, nothing to do with litigation, thankfully. I previously served on my firm's recruiting committee, and I currently am one of the global chairs for the firm's Black Lawyers group. So again, happy to be here. Thanks for having us, and really looking forward to the discussion.
And to round it out, well, Nahim will be joining us shortly, and I'll let him introduce himself when he does. He's got a client call that's running a little late. But I'm Roy Prather. I'm a partner at Beveridge Diamond, an environmental law firm. My practice is almost entirely litigation, so sorry, Jen. But I've been at the firm for about 6 years and practiced for 11. And so I am the chair of our firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and also very involved in our recruiting committee in coordination with the D&I committee. So looking forward to sharing insights and other things that I've encountered and learned over the years in those roles. I think we can dive in. So let's see here. So the things we're going to cover this evening, some in more detail than others, but we want to make sure we kind of touch on the entire, what we would consider life of the OCI process. So at the very outset, we'll talk through kind of evaluating what we call the candidacy package, or really your materials that you're going to put together and send to the various firms that you would be bidding for OCI, the factors that you want to consider when you're deciding which firms you actually want to apply to, how to handle the screening interviews of OCI and how those are distinct from callback interviews that you would have following a successful screening interview. So a few practical tips about interviewing virtually, since that is just our reality in 2020 at this point, and will be in 2021, at least for the first half of the year. And then also what steps to take once you've gone through the OCI process. Regardless of how successful you are in it, there are things that you can do to increase your opportunities and increase your chances to make the most out of opportunities that you do get out of participating in OCI. And we'll touch a little bit on some common mistakes we've seen over the years that are pretty easily avoidable, but we think they're worth noting for people, just to make sure you don't get tripped up on things that sometimes we see law students sometimes can otherwise avoid. And with that, just so that everybody's kind of on the same page of what we're going to be talking through and what we're covering, this first slide talks about kind of the life cycle of the OCI season. And really, we don't need to spend too much time here, but because I think it kind of reflects what we'll be talking to in more detail. But you have the pre-OCI prep, which is honestly one of the most significant parts of the process of just putting together the resume and cover letter. I know you've been able to participate in sessions with NBLSA already on those topics. So hopefully you've put into practice what people have shared with you there. And then it's your research of the various firms, if you can, participating in mock interviews and kind of getting those muscles going so that you're ready to go and comfortable when you get to the screening interview. Then there's the bidding process by which you'll select which firms you want to apply to. And we understand it varies by school how that is actually handled. So we won't go into too much detail about that, but there are some things that you can research on your end to make sure you maximize what opportunities you get in terms of what firms you actually get in front of through that process. And then in terms of the screening interviews, that's a little bit more standardized, where you're going to have that kind of 20-minute quick session with one or two people where you have your chance to kind of make the best impression you can so that they would be inclined to give you a callback interview and meet with more people at the firm. And so, the OCI process is pretty unique because you ultimately end up doing multiple of those kind of 20-minute sessions over the course of a day. It can be quite draining, but certain practices you can put in place will put you in a position to be able to weather that storm and come out successful. In terms of the callback interviews, that usually gets scheduled some weeks after, sometimes shortly after, but usually a week or maybe two after the OCI screening interviews, where you'll meet with 4 to 6, sometimes even more people at a firm and speak with each of them, sometimes for 30 minutes apiece, sometimes with large groups. And then also, from that process, you come to getting an offer of employment, or, you know, being notified that, you know, they weren't able to extend an offer. And again, there are things that you can do regardless of how that plays out that can increase your odds of having opportunities in the summer. Or if you have multiple offers, there are ways you can approach that can, you know, put you in good standing with every place that gives you an offer, instead of kind of burning a bridge or things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those considerations as well.
I just wanted to add there, if you're lost about anything that Roy just explained, please call your career services office as soon as possible and talk to someone there to have them explain to you the deadlines and procedures that are happening at your school right now with respect to OCI, because obviously given the pandemic, kind of the old way of doing things is somewhat out and the old timelines are out. We obviously don't know what's happening at your respective schools. So we're speaking in generalities, but time is of the essence right now. So if you're lost about any of those steps that we just went through pretty quickly, please reach out to your career services office tomorrow.
That's a really good point, Morgan. And one other thing I would add to that as well is to, I think I might have lost a thought. I did. So we'll move on. Sorry. She covered it so well that whatever I was thinking wasn't good enough to stay in my head. So we'll keep moving. Thanks, Morgan. With respect to bidding, there is a pretty significant amount of work on the front end that you can do that will be really helpful in positioning yourself. Brittany, do you want to share with folks a little bit of the considerations that they should be keeping in mind in terms of the approach here?
Absolutely. So to me, this is the most important part of the process, which is figuring out what exactly it is that you bring to the table. This is a time to be really honest with yourself. We all know that big law can be fairly pretentious. We won't pretend that's not the case. And so they're going to be looking for the prestigious law schools, the high grades, the law journals, things of that nature. If you have them, great, emphasize them. If you don't, then you need to be figuring out, okay, can I highlight this part of my grades? Do I have experience that is outside of what the typical law student would? If you took time off in between, can you highlight that you have a degree of maturity, that you have this exposure for those kinds of reasons? And the only way that people at this phase are going to see that is if you put it in the package that's getting sent to them. And so your resume is going to be key. So you need to play up whatever assets that you have, and you need to, what you're going to get shortly, is to research the law firms to see where you can best parlay your assets to those people. Because what you want is more opportunities, not necessarily that you want to get in front of these specific prestigious firms. And I think that there's a little confusion because when people do this research, they don't think about in the long term what their goals are, whether you want to be a law firm partner, which is a very complex analysis. And I don't recommend thinking about that at this phase right now. You need to be honest about what goals you have when you first get out of school. What is it you want to do? What are you good at? Who are you good and what teams are you good at working with? And once you've done that, then you can transition over to looking at the types of firms that you want to get into. You want to add to that, Roy?
Yeah, I think you covered it well. One thing I will add in terms of evaluating the law firms, it's not just important to think about what it is that you want to do, but make sure that the range that you're covering in terms of types of law firm, types of work those firms do line up with what your interests are, right? There are some firms that are heavily geared towards doing a lot of transactional work. If you want to do litigation and you already know that's what you're interested in doing, then it wouldn't really benefit you to use a bid to try and apply to a firm that's doing primarily transactional and maybe has one or two people that do litigation, because that's not going to be a good match for you because they're not typically going to be looking for people to bring in that do litigation work. And along those same lines, I would recommend that you think broadly about what type of practice area you're interested in, because the truth is, as a law student and even as a lawyer just starting out, it's impossible to know what it looks like to work in a particular area. Like, for example, I'm an environmental lawyer. I did not take environmental law in law school. I did not take any science classes in college intentionally. I didn't take math either. That's a different story. But basically, when I came out, I just knew I wanted to litigate. And so I went to a firm that I knew would give me the opportunity to do the most different types of litigation I could, which included, intellectual property, patent litigation, labor and employment, commercial litigation, financial, all kinds of different things, because then it would give me a chance to make a call, since I wasn't forced early on to decide, make a call on what I'm interested in. And then lo and behold, I fell into environmental law somehow. And I love it, but there's no way I would have known that coming out of law school. And I would have looked a little foolish if I went in the door in the screening interview or in a later interview and said, I want to do patent law, unless I was an engineer and I had a computer science degree and I knew like patent was just the thing that I wanted to do. Most people are not in that position. And so don't feel like there's a need for you to identify something specific when you're trying to find the firm that you want to apply to. Just look for the ones that will give you the opportunity to get the experiences you want and expose you to the things that you're interested in doing. Go ahead, Brittany.
Well, and we're going to get to separate like individual factors, but where we've said these are how you do your research, what I wish I had known when I was doing all of this was it's easy to go on the website and see what practice groups are available. That's just minimum. So because you don't want to get into an interview and say, I want to do arbitration, and the firm doesn't have an arbitration practice. Yes, that does happen. You want to go and figure out, is that the firm's strong suit? Is that a group that is possibly growing? So it's not just looking at a high level and saying, okay, this is an offering. I want to click and see how many attorneys are in that practice. How many junior attorneys are in that practice? Is there a space that it looks like to grow? Things I would have never thought of. So when I went to my first law firm, I wasn't focused on the fact that it was a private equity shop. And that's what it was known for. You won't get that from just looking at the AmLaw lists, or even sometimes just looking at the blogs, or even going onto Above the Law. You get those things from Googling and looking around and seeing what practice areas you have interest in, and then see who does those things. If you're a litigator, if you're into litigation, find interesting cases, look at the dockets. It sounds so like ridiculous to do. Look at the firm that's coming up again and again and again, and that's the firm that's going to be strong in litigation. If you're interested in all these deals that are going on, look at who's managing them. Most people don't look at the bottom parts of the big deal alerts that come into the Wall Street Journal, but they usually mention the firms. So those are things that the average person isn't doing as a law student to figure out. And it's going to help you decide how you're going to kind of direct your ship. And then we talk about talking to classmates. Roy and I had an interesting discussion about this earlier. None of you guys know, unless your parents are friendly friends, which most of us work in this arena, really truly know what's it like inside these law firms. But you know who does? The people who are older students at your school. Don't underestimate being able to get some advice from 3Ls. Take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, these are people who were on the ground, experienced in summer programs, and can tell you ways to make yourself look good. So look for little tidbits that are different than just the traditional Google search.
I just wanted to add here, like kind of big picture, and Brittany touched on this in the beginning. I think it's really important to remember to cast a wide net. I mean, in law school, it's really, really easy to get sucked into, like Brittany said, the kind of the focus on prestige, and everybody would like to work at, the top shop. But the reality is that there are only so many spots at those places. And if you, again, like Brittany mentioned, if you have the credentials, great. If you know that you don't have those credentials, you need to really think strategically about casting a wide net. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that people, as law students, it's very hard to remember that there is a lot of value in potentially being like a big fish in a small pond, and not being kind of like influenced by a lot of the groupthink that law students are susceptible to about, it's kind of like just chasing the prestige constantly. And I mean, to me, I think that is really the key when it comes to your bidding, because if you use all your bids and you don't get matched, you'll be devastated and you won't have the opportunities. You really need to cast your wide net. And even the places that you think, okay, I really don't think I want to work there, it's all just good practice for you to interview and fine tune how you're going to present yourself on the interviews where you really do want the position. So just keep that all in mind when you're doing your research. And smaller shops are also sometimes easier to research because they have a targeted practice. And if it's something that you can sink your teeth into and try to sell yourself, then you can get your foot in the door that way.
So Morgan alluded to several of these things, and Brittany did as well, in terms of specific factors to consider. A few things that I think are worth highlighting: the geography piece. So even though you are casting a wide net, you still have to be strategic about doing that. That means that, yes, you should certainly be applying to cities, to firms in cities where you have family, where you live currently, where you have connections that you can actually demonstrate, including where you went to law school. That's kind of a no-brainer, because law firms in the city where you went to law school generally will be hiring people out of that law school regularly. One thing that you don't want to do is kind of reach to cities that you just think, oh, I might like to live there. I don't know anyone there. I've never lived there. No one I know has ever lived there, but I just think it's a cool city. Firms are pretty much always going to be able to tell that you don't have a connection. And if they think you don't have a connection, they're going to be skeptical that even if they gave you a job and you went to work there, you're not going to stay. And so, you're just decreasing your odds for opportunities if you kind of reach to cities where you don't have any connections starting out. That can change down the road, once you've been practicing for a little while. But as a law student, it's a bad approach to take. Brittany, did you have something?
I was going to say, we should, since you and I both dealt with this, add a little color here. So what am I talking about? So I went to Howard for law school. I'm originally from Florida. I wanted to go work in Atlanta. I interviewed to go in Atlanta. I got some callbacks down there, but the laser focus was on, was I really, really going to come back? And so you have to have a very compelling reason. I wanted to go back to the South, and I wanted to go work at a firm in Alabama. They did not believe me, even though I had family there. They were like, you moved up to Howard, you're in DC, where are you going to go? And they assumed, because of what my grades were, that I was just going to go to New York. Now, I did end up in New York, but that was because I couldn't tap into the smaller markets. And so I can say the Southern markets, those really small niche markets, you have to really show ties and an interest in that community. Other bigger markets, yes, it's hard to land in New York, but because there's so many jobs in New York, it can be easier in some instances. So those are all things that you want to keep in mind when you're submitting bids, based on how many you have and based on where you think you can live. I had not set foot in New York except for when I did my callback interview. So that's kind of how they work. I know, for example, in DC is very hard to break into unless you want to do certain specific specialties, which were going on to practice areas. All these things are like pieces of a puzzle that you want to put together to present the best package.
Okay, can you hear me? All right, there we go. Yeah, so I can definitely relate, Brittany. I ran into the same issue. I went to college in Philly and law school in DC and was trying to go to Atlanta, which is where I'm originally from. And they just still weren't interested, even though my family was still there. So, that's just the nature of how things can work. And so understanding how those locations differ, because New York is kind of come one, come all, compared to a lot of these other cities. So I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. And I think Brittany and Morgan touched on this a bit, Brittany in particular, in terms of the firm culture, firm size, and the kind of nature of how they're staffed. So a lot of these pieces of information are things that you're going to get by talking to people who have been in the summer program at that firm, work there now, or otherwise kind of being able to reach out to people who can share information with you. it's important to know that, because ultimately, if you're going to kind of stand out when you go into your screening interview, one of the ways you do that is showing you have a knowledge and understanding of how that firm works and what that firm does. And that's something that you can actually come in the door with. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the interview itself. But, you know, ultimately, I think in terms of factors to consider with respect to kind of training opportunities, that's something that typically firms will kind of publicize on their website. They'll talk about, you know, what their summer program looks like, what programs they have in place to get junior lawyers up to speed and kind of learning. And so you'll want to take a look at that. If you're interested in being a litigator and the firm says, what we care about most is getting our junior lawyers opportunities in the courtroom as early as possible. That's very different than some firms where the junior lawyers, even if you're doing litigation, you're going to primarily be doing document review the first year or two. And so knowing that difference, and it may be that it's a smaller firm that does that, you know, hands-on litigation opportunity, don't direct your attention to that big firm that's going to have you doing doc review for 2 years if you know you'll be miserable and it's not at all lined up with kind of what your interests are. If you could go to this other firm where you're going to get the experience that you're really interested in, and making sure you know that ahead of time will help you bid in such a way that you're going to get potential opportunities to move in that direction. With that said,
I'm going to add just
go ahead, Brittany.
One thing. So you're going to also hear a lot of terms that you don't necessarily always understand. So you will hear firms that are kill what you eat, and you will hear firms that have the floating or rotational staffing. You need to think about your personality in that environment. Kill what you eat is a very aggressive environment because you get the partners are getting paid based on what they do. So there's not as much combination. There's not collaboration as much. And if you have what's called a free market system, you have to be an aggressive person and go out and get your work. You can't expect your work to come in to you from a specific system. So think about how you function in a group, how big that group is, what you think you're going to be capable of doing, and that should also feed which firms you bid on.
I just want to add one more thing to that. You know, you should also think about what type of career do you want to have? In law school, a lot of times, and I'm sure you all are talking about this with your friends, people think, I would like to go to big law. I'd like to go to a big firm for 3 years, make a lot of money, pay off my student loans, and then I'm going to go off and find the practice that I really love, that makes me really happy. And that's what I'm going to do as my practice as a lawyer. I mean, I can't imagine that has changed so much from when I was in law school, that people still think the same way. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to go to this big shop where I know I'll be miserable because everybody I know who's there is miserable, but it won't matter because I'll make good money. And then I'll go off and follow my heart. I mean, and that works for some people. And you can certainly make money, but if you know that money is not really the motivator that gets you up in the morning, and that, well, yes, it's important and it's nice and we all like to have it, but that's not going to be what's going to get you through long term, then you really should be thinking more strategically about the type of practice that you want to have. There are some firms that have smaller classes because they don't build in attrition the same way that a lot of big firms do. Big firms have huge summer classes because they know that 90% of those people are not going to be left there after a certain number of years, usually 5 to 7 years, at which point you're either pushed out or you're basically part of the top 3% of what your class was and you're on the track to make partner or counsel. So think strategically about things like that too. And reach out to mentors that you have at different firms to think about, their experiences. So you're making strategic decisions about the type of firms that you're bidding at, and also can sell yourself better to those firms as someone who wants to be somewhere long-term versus someone who wants to get a certain type of experience and then move on to go in-house or whatever else you think you ultimately want to do.
So after taking all of those into consideration and crafting your bids for what firms you want to have an opportunity to interview with, you'll be able to be matched with and selected to interview with a number of different firms. And so Morgan and Jen are going to kind of share some tips and ideas about how to approach that the screening interview.
Great, thanks, Roy. Yes, so interviews. We had touched on this a little bit before when Roy walked through the overall timeline and process for OCI, but just as a reminder, so the screening interview, that's sort of your first step in the process as far as getting into the firm. So you might get certain screening interviews with firms. That's going to be a 20-minute interview with one, maybe two people from the firm. And they are, based on that interview, going to make a decision about whether to give you a call back where you'd come back and meet more people. So those interviews are obviously really short, right? 20 minutes is not a lot of time. And so your goal is to be the most impressive person that you can possibly be in 20 minutes. So again, you don't have a lot of time, so you want to make sure that you're using it wisely. So even questions that seem like introductory questions or softball questions, you really want to be thoughtful about how you're responding to those and view them as an opportunity to show information about yourself. So an example that I like to give is if I ask a law student, hey, how is law school going so far? How are you liking law school? I will say most of the time, the answer that I get is, yeah, law school's been really great. My professors are really nice. The classes are interesting, and I've gotten along with my classmates. Like, what have I learned from you from that response? The answer is nothing, right? I learned absolutely nothing from you. We've lost 2.5, 3 minutes of the 20 minutes that you have, and I've gained no information from you. So that response, it might be true, but it's not helpful for you, and it's not giving you anything in that short window. So I think a better response is something like, yes, I've had the opportunity to meet with 2Ls and 3Ls who've really helped give me guidance on how to best organize my time and get myself organized. And I've found that I've now been able to put a system in place that allows me to, get all of my classwork done, participate in my extracurriculars, and still feel like I'm, getting my exercise and sort of personal life together as well. Like, I think that's, and obviously you would prepare for it a little bit better than that. But the idea there is like, oh, okay, this person's resourceful. Like, they've gone and sought out, help and guidance from people who have experience in this realm above them. They have time management skills. They have organizational skills. So there's ways that you can answer all of these questions to convey information about yourself in a way that's really going to maximize that very short 20 minutes that you have. Callback interviews are honestly very similar. So there's going to be, anywhere from 4 to 8 interviews in a row, and they're probably going to be about 30 minutes with various people at the firm. And so, if you get a call back from Latham, you'll go not in person because this is obviously COVID times, but you'll probably have, from 9 a.m. until noon or 1, just back-to-back interviews with like 6 to 8 different people at Latham, all various seniority levels, various practice groups. Sometimes you will know who you're meeting with in advance, sometimes you won't. And so you really need to be prepared to have a full, several hour interview process. What I will say is, again, very similar to what I just talked about with the screening interview, it's important to keep in mind what the goal of the callback is for you, right? The goal of the callback is to get an offer at the end of the callback. The goal of the callback is not for you to figure out which firm is going to be the best fit for you. That process you can do later, and there's second look opportunities for you to be able to come back and meet with more attorneys, and we'll talk about that later. There's us and other resources that you might have met along the way that you can consult once you have offers in hand. But the point of the callback is to get the offer in hand. So again, purpose is not to find out if you like the firm or not. It's really to be the most impressive person that you can be in each of those 30-minute interviews. Being prepared is probably the most important thing that you can do to get ready for these interviews. So, spending 5 minutes to flip through a firm's website is not going to be sufficient. And Brittany and Roy touched on this sort of in the preparation piece about getting ready for bidding. But that similar process is something that you should be doing here once you've actually narrowed down the firms that you're going to have a screening interview with. So yes, you should look at the website, but you also should be talking to, 3Ls at your school who might have summered at those firms. You should be talking to attorneys that you've met through various networking events who are at those firms. You should be doing really deep dives into the website to understand whether or not these firms have certain practice areas, have certain mentoring programs, whatever it may be. So make sure that upfront you are doing your diligence, because I will say, as someone who's interviewed a lot of law students, it is so clear when somebody has not done the research. And for me, when I'm interviewing you, if you don't want to be at the firm, I don't want you here, right? So you want to really come across like this is the number one choice on your list, even if it's not. Know your resume. This is important, and it's twofold, right? So the first thing is, yes, you need to know everything on your resume. If you have a reference to a thesis that you wrote your senior year of undergrad, you need to be able to talk about the thesis and what it was and what the topic was, and be able to do that intelligently. If your first year summer position is on your resume, you need to be able to talk about that. So make sure that everything on you're familiar with your resume and you're ready to answer any questions about anything that's on it. But I think the more important part of this is, yes, you need to be prepared to talk about the things on your resume, but you also need to be prepared to talk about them in a way that highlights skills and traits that are going to be valuable in the legal profession. A lot of people don't have any prior legal experience. A lot of people came straight through from undergrad. That is totally fine. You just need to be able to talk about those experiences in a way that draws out the things that we're looking for in our junior lawyers. So attention to detail, organizational skills, problem-solving skills, teamwork, resourcefulness, all of those things you can sort of draw out from your experiences. So an example I like to use is if you were, a statistical analyst for a company prior to going to law school. When you're talking about that experience, I don't really want to hear about the actual statistical stuff that you were doing, because that's not relevant to the legal profession. What I want to hear about is, did you manage a team of junior analysts below you? Did you come across a problem that you had to solve in a really short amount of time, and how did you do that? Did you have time management, like multitasking and time management issues that you needed to confront? So just really be thoughtful about about what are the types of things that that law firms are looking for in their lawyers. And if you don't know what those things are, your career services office can help you understand what those things are. And then really think about, before the interview, how can you translate the things on your resume into that? The next bullet is on just perfecting your pitch and telling a cohesive story. So you should sort of think about in advance, again, the 3 to 5 themes that you really want to get across about yourself. So when I was going through this process, the things that I tried to convey was that I was a natural leader, I was a fast learner, and I was resourceful in that I would, use the resources around me to try to solve a problem before just raising my hand for help. And that I was a good team player. So those were the 4 things that I wanted to make sure came across in my interviews. And what I did was, before my interviews, I would try to think of a bunch of different stories for each of those themes that would demonstrate that theme. And I tried to pick stories that were broad enough where I could use that story as an answer to a variety of different questions. And if you have thought about all of that in advance, then when you're actually in the interview and somebody asks you a question, you can pick from one of those stories and you can weave that theme throughout. So every single answer, I was hitting one of those 4 themes, so that by the time my interviewer walks away at the end of the 30 minutes, they're like, oh, okay, like I get it. She's a leader, like she's a fast learner, she's a team player, like got it. So that's all of this, again, is stuff that you need to do in advance of the interviews, and mock interviews, doing those if they're put on by your law student association or by local bar associations. Doing mock interviews will help you get really comfortable with just being able to tweak those stories real time in response to questions. But that is going to be the easiest way, I think, to really make an impression on your interviewers, because they will have this cohesive story that will stick in their mind if you've been honing those points home.
Jen, can I hop in here?
Yeah, please.
So I just wanted to reiterate that. So Jen's story about weaving in her themes, I think is the most important thing that you should take from this session. That is a skill that you will use for the rest of your career, because the whole point of the screening interview is not for us to know the nitty-gritty detail of what you have on your resume. Just like Jen said, some people just don't have that much even on their resume by the time they're doing these interviews, and that's fine. Those people continue to be successful lawyers in big law and other places. What we're trying to do is get an authentic feel for you, have a personal connection with you, and to see your potential to come and be successful at our law firm. So the only way for us to know that is if you are spoon feeding us in an authentic way details about you and your experience. The only way for you to do that is for you to take the time to prepare beforehand those anecdotes that will come out naturally, so that it doesn't sound like, you know, you're making up some story of something that didn't happen in your own life, but just an authentic story of, oh, when I was in college, I did this, that, and the other, or I led this effort to do this, that, and the other, or I had this project and I did this, or whatever it may be. So that to me is the key to successful interviewing. And it's the same thing you're going to do if you want a lateral. It's going to be the same thing you're going to do once you're pitching yourself to do any number of other things. So while it may feel somewhat uncomfortable to do it now, to sit down and really tease apart those things and practice, like stand at home and literally practice telling the stories, like say them in front of the mirror, talk to your friend, do them to, say them to your roommates, say them to your partners, your parents, whomever. If you can't get a mock interview, do mock interviews with your friends so that you are ready to have them in the back of your mind and just pull them out as they sound natural in the conversation. And that leads, unless anybody wants to jump in there,
Yeah,
Brittany, you look like.
Add one thing to how you do this. A lot of this stuff is a lot of information coming at you. I always recommend people do the STAR method. If you have not seen that before, it is situation, task, action, and result. You want to be able to get through that really quickly. So a lot of law students can sometimes struggle with rambling. When you get these anecdotes, maybe come up with 5 of them, and then sit down and literally map out the situation, the task, the action that you took, and the result. And it'll help you get fluid and comfortable with being able to quickly get in and out and explain things. Because remember, it's 20 minutes and you might be able to get across 2-3 stories if you're efficient with it. And just to add to everyone's point, it's not the story itself, but how you tell it. So I remember someone talked to me about being a manager at H&M. And the way they talked to me about it, I was able to go back into a hiring committee meeting and demonstrate the person was super mature, and that person got and ended up getting an offer. So don't fret about what exactly it is, but think about how you can make yourself look good doing it. You're a car salesman almost.
Yeah, it's literally like if you were in your student senate at undergrad, like you can work with that. If you were treasurer of your fraternity, like all of that stuff, you can translate it into things that are going to be helpful traits for a lawyer. So it's again, you might need to brainstorm with career services, you might need to brainstorm with friends, but that's like very important prep work that's going to be crucial for you nailing the interview.
And that, wait, go back, we have more. Go back, Roy. All right, yep, sorry. And I think I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. Okay, so that leads us into energy. You have to be on as much as possible during these interviews. You're going to be tired, you're going to be stressed, your adrenaline will be up, you'll be nervous, but you really need to just focus and keep your energy high. From the minute an interview starts, your interviewer is going to sense your energy. If you are down, sad, just disappointed in the way that your last interview just went, this person's going to know it unless you don't get it together and start with positivity, smiling, upbeat, authentic, but upbeat. You have to keep your energy level high, because what you want to do again is to create a connection, a volley of positive back and forth between you and the interviewer. And it doesn't mean that, again, like you're reciting your resume, it's just a positive, high energy conversation that literally, when it's going well, you'll look up and 20 minutes will be gone. When it's not going well, 20 minutes takes a very long time for the interviewer as well. So you really want to keep it up and keep it going. If there's a lull, have some questions that you've prepared already that are not, we're going to go into questions that you shouldn't ask, but some thoughtful questions that you can pull out of your back pocket to keep the conversation going. Virtual interviews. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because if your career services hasn't talked to you about this already, then I'm sure they have a pamphlet somewhere to tell you what to do and what not to do in terms of your background, what you wear, how you present yourself, decent lighting. For these, you do not want to be worried about your Wi-Fi. You do not want to be worried about your connectivity. You don't want to be worried about headphones. Get all of your technology straight far in advance. Try to familiarize yourself with whatever technology that the firms are going to be using. I spoke to my own firm recruiting coordinator to find out, how are we doing it? And we're using a lot of firms are using a third-party hosted site to do these interviews. That's not Zoom or WebEx or any of these other services that we've all gotten used to now. So, anticipate that things may not go always so smoothly, and that's fine. It's something new for everyone. The lawyer is going to know that. The school will know that. Don't let it, ruffle you too much if you can't hear the attorney, but you don't want the errors to be on your side. So if the Wi-Fi at your house is a little wonky, then maybe you need to rent a hotel room for the day. If your roommate is home, they could not be streaming their Netflix at the same time that you're doing your OCI interviews. Take away as many potential impediments to success on this as possible, because you don't want to look back and say, if I had just done XYZ, I would have felt so much more comfortable and I would have felt better about it and maybe it would have gone better. So obviously check your name, make sure your name is your actual legal name on your Zoom name, your background. Don't type on your computer during any of these interviews. That happened recently in an interview that I did. It was extremely distracting. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but if you don't know what the tech service will be, call your career services and find out and see if you can be familiar with any of the services that are offered on there.
All right. We'll kind of fly through these as well, but at every interview, the screening interview included, both screening interview and callbacks, they're probably going to give you a chance to ask questions, at least one, maybe 2 or 3 questions. So you should be prepared. Saying I don't have any questions, that is not a good answer. You definitely want to have questions at the ready. But what I would say about this is, number 1, use your judgment. Number 2, remember the golden rule that we talked about, which is that every word that comes out of your mouth should be something that is going to tell the interviewer about you, because again, you've only got 20 or 30 minutes to convey as much information as possible. So I'll go through a couple of don'ts and then I'll go through the do. So, don't ask questions that you can find the answer to on the firm website. So again, that sounds obvious, but people do it every single recruiting season. They're like, oh, what is your pro bono policy, or what kind of, how does your summer program work? Like, that information is on the website. Don't ask the question. Don't ask questions about diversity. And the reason I say this is because I don't think that builds anything for you, right? Like, I can see you and tell that you're a diverse person and that you're probably going to care about diversity. You asking about it conveys no new information to me as the interviewer. And again, the point of this interview is not for you to figure out what firm you want to be at. That will come later. The point is for you to get the offer, and so to impress the interviewer as much as possible. Don't ask questions about pro bono. Same thing. Like, I'm going to assume that most people want to do pro bono work at the firm. Asking that question is not telling me anything about you that's going to be helpful in whether or not I hire you. Don't ask questions about work-life balance. Again, these are all fair questions to ask, but this just isn't the time to do it. Because the work-life balance thing, it's just, I think that is such a known no-no that it will just show poor judgment if you do ask it. And obviously, people want to be hiring people that are ready to work hard. Okay, so those are some don'ts. I would say the do is, again, ask questions that convey information about yourself. So the trick that I used to use is I would tell like a very quick anecdote as a lead in to why I was asking the question. So for instance, I might say something like, you know, mentoring's always been really important to me. I've always, whatever community I've been a part of, I've tried to make sure that I'm teaching and bringing up those below me. Can you talk a little bit about the mentor programs that you guys have here and how mentorship has played a role in your career? Something like that. You're going to get some information that you want to know about mentorship, but you've also been able to communicate that you are somebody who's going to be a good firm citizen and who's going to train junior associates and invest in the people below them. So again, this is another pre-prep thing, but you should be thinking about questions, you know, in advance before you walk into the interview room that you can ask. And there's a lot of open-ended questions that you can ask that just work for anybody. The lawyers are probably not going to really be talking to each other about what questions you asked. So you can ask the same question to multiple people to get their perspective.
I kind of disagree with that, Jen, just a little.
About talking to each other?
Asking the same question to multiple attorneys.
I think it depends what the question is. If the question is like, what is your summer program like, then yeah. But I think if the question is like, why did you pick the firm? I mean, that's a person.
I just want to make sure that they're using like the right judgment, because you know sometimes we're Nick people. We will be like, she asked the same thing to me, same thing to me, same thing to me when we get in the hiring committee. So just, you want to be interesting and intriguing. Yeah.
All right, well, Brittany had also raised a very good point earlier with respect to my earlier point regarding your energy. Also check your body language. Make sure you're sitting up straight. Don't slouch over. Sit forward, be attentive. Those are all things that would demonstrate interest. And if you are not doing it, it can be very off-putting to the interviewer. And also now it's just general good old Zoom etiquette these days. And with respect to callbacks, obviously all the same advice applies because it'll all be via Zoom anyway. Callbacks, I say these are like your charm offensive. This is where you're gonna come in and make them love you. That's the goal. And ultimately it's you can ask more in-depth questions about about the firm. Again, like Jen said, good questions, bad questions, use your judgment. But here you're gonna hammer home those themes that you had already prefaced with your screener interviews. You will not have the same interviewers as you had in your first round of OCI interviews. So you can build on and use some of the things you talked about in that first interview. But again, like Brittany said, use your judgment so you're not doing the same thing with everyone. In your callback, you should be prepared to explain any negatives, overt negatives on your resume or on your transcript. Have an explanation that you've already gone through and you're comfortable with to explain those things, so that you're not stumbling over it if someone says, okay, well, you know, what's this huge gap on your resume? What were you doing? What's this bad grade that you got? What happened here? You need to be able to explain that, and you should practice that beforehand. And that's where you can ask a more targeted questions about the firm. With respect to bad interviews, I'm just going to hop in here a little bit. And I mentioned this before, you need to brush it off and move on. Everything is not for everybody, and that's fine. So if it didn't go well, move on to the next one. You can't carry it with you to the next screener because there's no time. And keep in mind that the interviewer is also seeing just as many people. So, you know, what's happening in front of you in that moment, try to maximize it. And if it doesn't go the way that you wanted, you know, get up, walk around your house, come back, sit back down and get back into it. You really have to try to let it go because no one is going to ace them all. No one will. So don't have the expectation that that's going to happen. So once you're prepared to let it go, you'll be able to recover.
And just, you know, one thing I'll add to that, to keep in mind, all you need is one. You just need one to hit. That's it, like ultimately. So, you know, that next one could be that one. So don't let that opportunity pass up because the one before or two before didn't go the way you wanted them to.
And I'll just add, oh, go ahead, Maureen.
No, I was just going to say, Naheem, he had said this the other night. And so if he were here, he would say it now. You don't need to hit a home run. You just need to get on base. So don't take it too far. You only need one, and you just got to get on base for the purposes of the screeners. And then you'll do the real work when it comes to the callbacks.
The only quick thing I was going to say, and Morgan and Jen brought up a great point, which is everyone loves to ask the question, what is your greatest weakness? Or they will pull your transcript and ask you about your bad grade. You can't look like a deer in headlights. And it's not about necessarily the explanation. You have to say, yes, this is what happened, but this is what I've done since. So in a moment of transparency, I was interviewing for a job 3 years ago, about 6 years out of school. And one of the head of my future group was like, what the heck is this C that you got? 6 years out and you're still asking about this. So then I had to make him look stupid and was like, well, actually, then I went on to get high grades in legal writing and all these other things. And then I did an internship and I have all these other awards. So it really means nothing to me now. I had to learn from it. And being that way was great. So if you're already in the interview, you're qualified. You just need to stand in it and say, yep, that's what happened. And I've learned this from it. And that's all they're looking for.
That's right.
So keeping it moving, just moving to the post OCI, we'll just quickly cover this. I don't think there's a lot there because some of this we've already referenced. One point that we did want to bring up though was the issue of thank you notes. There is divided opinion on this, but with respect to OCI, because of how short and truncated that process is, there really isn't that much time or that much utility to trying to put together and send thank you notes to the people you meet in OCI. Because really two reasons. One, it's creating another chance for you to actually make some type of error that can ruin a good impression that you made. For example, if you're in a hurry and you're trying to get, because you don't know in advance who you're speaking with, so you're trying to make a tailored thank you note to someone and you're rushing to do it, and there's a typo or a misspelling or an error in that, that's going to jump out at the person and it could then undo or overshadow all of the good work you did in the interview speaking with them. With OCI in general, typically after you leave that room and they've finished all of their interviews for the day, by the end of that day, they already have a sense, if they haven't already fully decided, who's going to get the callback. And so that thank you note is not going to be something that's going to like put you over the top. Right. And so help yourself out, take one thing off the list of things, the million things you have to do to prepare and go through that process. And don't worry about the thank you notes for OCI. Callbacks, it could go either way. I still think that they're not as effective or useful as they used to be. It used to be just like kind of a common thing that everyone expected. Now, even though the decision's not made as quickly, even something as simple as an email, a short email thanking the people you spoke to for their time and referencing something that came up during the course of the interview just to show that you were engaged and you remembered, that can be helpful. But again, you're kind of opening the door to, if there's a typo in that email, depending on the type of lawyer you're dealing with, they will seize on that and be like, well, this person doesn't pay attention to detail, right? And so ultimately, I don't think it's as helpful as it otherwise would be. It is a personal decision, but I'm inclined to tell people that it's not necessary because it's not going to be that thing that puts you over the top.
Yeah, I agree. It will never be the reason that you get a job. So why do it? It could be a reason you don't get one, but it will never be the reason that you get one.
I also want to pipe up here to say, please, please, please proofread your resumes and have someone else proofread your resumes, because I have sat in numerous recruiting committee meetings where you've actually made it to a decision round and attorneys have found typos in your resume and they will not let you go forward. So take the time now and make sure that they are as perfect as you can possibly get it. that will be a deciding factor, unlike a thank you note.
So we're running towards the end of our time. We want to make sure there's time for people to ask questions. But one thing we did want to cover is, if you go through the OCI process, you go through the interviews and all of that, and ultimately you don't get any callbacks, or the callbacks you get don't work out. There are still a number of things you can do to secure opportunities for yourself coming out of the OCI process. It then becomes a moment of, now time to do some additional hustle, whether that's identifying, attending job fairs, because a lot of firms are, while they are doing hiring through OCI, that is not the entirety of the pool of people that they will bring into the firm ultimately. Some of them will have made offers to people who decided to go and work at a different firm. And so they'll still be looking for people to fill slots. They'll still be sending people to job fairs to look and see if there are any candidates that they didn't get to see during OCI that they think would be a good fit. And so those are your opportunities to get in front of another group of folks. You've now further honed your skills in terms of the interviewing, so you'll be even better prepared and well-equipped to impress them. And so, we listed a couple of things, examples. The BALSA is a perfect example of, a job fair where, my firm regularly sends someone to meet with law students and have hired through that, and various other bar associations and organizations. You should take advantage of every single one of them. There's no reason, if you have not secured that opportunity, that any one of those opportunities should come up that you are not present and participating.
I'll just add that some of these actually happen before OCI, depending on when your school's OCI is. So these are also things you should be looking into now, because you wouldn't want to miss one of these if they happen to be in early January, for instance.
That's a great point. And in addition, there are, if you've done your research on kind of firms you're interested in when you were doing your bidding, there may be firms that you wanted to interview with through OCI that you didn't get the opportunity to because you just didn't match up with them. There is individual follow-up that you could do with either the recruiting coordinator or specific lawyers at that firm to make it known, make them aware. I was, very interested in your firm. I didn't get an opportunity to interview. Would it be possible to speak with you or speak with someone at the firm about my interest? Oftentimes, you send your materials along and they'll take a look and they'll say, you'll have some that will say, sure, why don't we just schedule a call? And that basically turns into a new screening interview, right? And that's another opportunity to impress someone and get an opportunity to get a call back and ultimately get an opportunity at the firm. So what I'm really trying to emphasize here is that the OCI process is not the be all end all of securing employment for the summer or for after law school. And you shouldn't treat it as such, because everyone's path is unique and there are a wide range of ways to get in that door. The goal is to just do whatever you need to get in that door. Let's see. Unless my fellow speakers have anything else, I think we can turn it over and answer some questions.
Thank you all. I have a good amount of questions, and I've tried to group them to put them into groups. Some of them you've touched on, so we'll be able to go through them a bit more quickly. The first set are tied to, generally they're tied to establishing connections in a city or state that you're not from. So the first one asks, if you're a 1L or 2L and you want to practice in a particular state that you don't have any connections in and that you're not from, how do you go about seeking mentorship or connections with attorneys at various firms in that state? Is that something that's encouraged? And if so, how should students go about doing it?
So two things I would suggest. In terms of identifying attorneys that you can reach out to or connect to, that's always going to be valuable to you, because that's going to be a way that you can establish a connection with someone who can then speak of kind of how serious that your interest is in being there. The thing that you're going to want to make sure you're able to identify is, why do you want to be in that city? What is it about that location that says, I've never lived there, I don't have any people there? What is it? And whatever you come up with has to be compelling to whoever it is that you're going to reach out to. Because you're definitely going to need to do that outreach, because that's the only way you're going to help establish the credibility for yourself in terms of, I'm not just applying to this city on a whim. So, identify those people, who are, say, for example, could be people who are alum of your law school. It can be people who are who their background, there's some type of commonality that you have, so that then you have a way to connect with them, and then use that connection with those people, one, as a way to find out what the specific things you could do to signal your interest, and two, show them that your interest is genuine. So that when people are skeptical, there's someone at the firm that can say, no, I've talked with Jalen. He's really serious about being here, and I think you should take it seriously too. So, anyone else want to chime in?
I have a suggestion here. So let's say you're living in New York, but you want to move, to LA, but no one lives in LA. I would suggest, and you go to law school in New York. I would say during this time where really everyone is doing everything by Zoom, it makes it a lot easier to establish some connections. So I would join some bar associations based out of LA. I would join the young lawyers committees of those bar associations. And if I thought I was interested in litigation, I joined the litigation committee. And then I would reach out to the people who chair those committees and start relationships with those people. Just email, oh, can I have a Zoom coffee with you, whatever. Then when you're going to interview and you're bidding on firms in LA, you can say, even though I'm in New York and my law school's in New York, I've started to proactively get involved in the LA legal community because I know that's where I want to be, and I met XYZ person. Even if they're not at the law firm where you are actively interviewing. So I think that's an easy way to both show, and I think it's probably at this time, it's a low financial, entry to do that. So I would suggest that as a way to try to connect to people in various cities that you don't live in.
And a lot of those organizations let law students join for free too. So,
right.
Usually you may not even have to pay kind of any membership fees or anything like that.
Got it. This is a great follow-up to what Morgan just said. Let's say you're from a big city such as New York, but you actually attend a law school in Tennessee, for example, and you actually have interest in Tennessee, in the Nashville area, but a lot of interviewers are assuming or asking you whether you want to go back to New York. How do you kind of do the opposite of, being from a big city, but being able to speak to the fact that you want to be perhaps in a smaller legal market? How can you kind of deliver that in an interview setting?
I kind of had to deal with that when I was coming, well, it's not smaller, but from New York back down when I moved to DC. You have to have what people will call a motivating reason that makes sense. So, I've lived in New York my whole life. I now have been spending this amount of time here. The kind of lifestyle that I want to live is here. You might even say something, Trey, like I've been starting to look into homes here, some way to show that you've been that you've been building roots, and even having activities in the community. Maybe you're in the junior league there. Maybe you do something along those lines, but having not just legal ties, but community ties to where you are can show a seriousness of purpose. And that's what has to get conveyed when you're talking to people. You have to have a reason why, that it looks like New York doesn't fit the goals that you have or the way that you want to live your life.
And I think the law school thing, if you are in law school in that market, that helps a lot because that creates a tie right there. So you can really push on that you've been able to meet alumni who are still in the area and they've spoken about their practice and it just sounds like something that lines up with your values, blah, blah, blah. But I think that is much easier than literally going into a market with zero connections.
Thank you. The next one is, okay, let's say you're interested in a firm, but you're not particularly sure what practice area you want to go into. How do you talk about your interest in the firm, despite the fact that you don't know if you're leaning corporate or you're leaning litigation? How can you deliver in an interview the fact that you're really interested in the firm, despite the fact that you don't know exactly where you want to end up to start your career?
The vast majority of law students have no idea what type of law they want to practice. Or if they think they know what kind of law they want to practice, they actually have no idea what that means on a daily basis when they do practice. And it's not anything, I had no concept I was going to do what I do. Matrimonial and family law, I had no idea that that was what I was going to end up doing, nor did I know what that really meant on a day-to-day basis. And same with all my colleagues on this panel right now, none of us anticipated doing what we do. So don't worry about selling your interest in A over B. What you're selling is your ability and your open-mindedness. Honestly, I find it way more refreshing when a law student doesn't try to sell me on their particular interest in whatever niche practice that they Googled. Then I just have a key, I'm excited about the law and I'm looking forward to, looking into all the different things that you offer. I have an interest in this and an interest in that, but I'm flexible and I'm interested in hearing more about what you do. That's a good way to try to sell it. You don't have to sell your interest in litigation or transactional if you don't really know what you want to do. Don't worry about that. Most people don't.
And there's actually some firms like mine, for instance, at Latham, where we have the way we structure our junior associate program it's called an unassigned program, and it is very intentionally allowing junior associates to try different practice areas. So this could actually be a pro, and that's a way that you can explain why you're interested in Latham specifically, is because we have this program and because you want, you have a variety of interests and you're going to need time to figure it out. That's why you want to go to my firm specifically as opposed to other firms. So for firms like that, it's a benefit, and you should make that connection of hey, this is why I not only want to be in big law, but this is why I want to be at your firm.
And you also want to be careful because adding on to things, it can be a bad thing because a lot of the times there are some firms who have specific spaces for specific groups. So if you go in there and you say, I am diehard litigation, and they have given away all their litigation offers, but they had a whole separate set of 20 other seats for corporate people. They could have really liked you and you would have got that corporate seat, but they are going to think you're not interested and then not give you an offer. So I think overall, it's great to show that you have a specific interest, but you really just want to highlight you enjoy writing, you enjoy thinking, you think that you've done most things that are consistent with litigation, but you're also open to corporate because you want to look at the negotiation piece. Anything like that just makes you seem more thoughtful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next one is, let's see how I frame this one. Okay, if you have an offer from a law firm, but you're still interviewing with other law firms, how should students navigate that in terms of getting an offer before you've heard back from other law firms? Do you have any advice for how they should handle that situation?
Yeah,
go
ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
No, you got it.
Well, I was just going to say, what you want to avoid doing, what I'd say more than anything else, is saying yes to something and then going and taking something different, because that will, the legal community is small enough to where people, even if the new firm you go to still says great and brings you in, that will kind of sour an impression of you because you kind of went back on your word, right? And so I wouldn't recommend kind of just saying yes and then exploring other opportunities. Law firms are well aware that you're interviewing at lots of different places, right? And that you have a lot to consider, particularly if they're interested in you, they're going to assume other people are interested too. So it's totally fine to request additional time to consider what your options are. Some firms will be more pressed than others, but it always is helpful to ask for that additional time. Usually what will happen is, a firm will say, sure, can you get back to us in 2 weeks, right? Something like that. That then makes it incumbent on you to, whatever you need to do to advance the ball with the other firms you're considering, you have to reach out to them and explore that. You reach out and you say, I'm really interested in this, in your firm. I'm considering, other opportunities, but I'm very interested in yours. And I would just like to get a sense of what your timing is in terms of getting back to me about, the opportunity. Typically, if the firm realizes and they're interested in you, they realize, oh, you've got a week or two that you need to make a call on another offer, they're going to accelerate their process to make a decision, at least for you, so that they can, if you're someone that they definitely want, they can extend that offer before you go elsewhere. But the thing you have to be comfortable with is if that firm says, you've kind of pushed them to the side and they were kind of waiting to see how other offers they put out there shake out, because, you know, they're considering a lot of people too. And if they had to, you know, decide sooner, they might decide, oh, okay, yeah, actually we're going to pass. Like, you have to be okay with that. And personally, you should be, because you still got that other offer that's sitting right there that you're weighing. But the thing that you don't want to do is kind of waffle and leave it unclear to the firms, like what you're considering, what you've said yes to, what you haven't said yes to. If you've said yes to a firm, then you've locked yourself in, as far as I'm concerned, because you're going to damage your reputation otherwise.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Roy said. I would almost put a finer point on it and say, if you have an offer in hand and you are interviewing at other firms, like, I would tell the other firms that you have an offer. I wouldn't just say like, oh, I'm looking at other places. Like, tell them you have an offer, because that will make them speed up the process for you, especially as a diverse attorney in this environment. Yeah. You should be very forthcoming about that. I see in the chat, there's a follow-up about like what, you know, OCI and BALSA and stuff are fixed dates. I think number one, that's another reason to do some of the diversity job fairs that might be coming before OCI. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a couple that are in early January. Do those, because you might just be able to get ahead of OCI and not have to do OCI at all, which is obviously amazing. For places that are stuck at OCI, I would say, like, still be honest with the firm that gave you the offer and say, look, my career services, like, we love the offer. Thank you so much. I'm so interested in this firm. My career services office is really suggesting that I go through the OCI process. Is there any way you can extend the offer until, and then I would propose a date, honestly, and see how they react. And like Roy said, they might say, no, sorry, you've got a week. And then you need to make a decision on whether or not you're going to let the offer go or whether you're going to take it.
And I have go ahead, Brittany.
Oh, no, and keep in mind just practically how this works. Typically, a partner will call you and tell you that you have an offer. So you want to sound excited when they call. But if you have the offer in hand, you're going to be communicating with a recruiting person. So usually you would tell the recruiting person, hi, just checking in. I'm really excited about the offer. Thanks for that. Or then for the other firm, you would say, I'm looking forward to interviewing. I just received an offer. I just want to let you know of my updated timetable, just so for your consideration. What does that do? That lets you know that you're kind of a hot commodity. So it's never a bad thing for other firms to know that you have offers. So it's just who you communicate it to and how you sound when you communicate it.
Yeah, and I have two very quick points to follow up on that kind of goes to the big picture. We didn't talk about this so much, but second looks, if you have an offer or you're weighing two offers, you can affirmatively request to speak to additional people at the law firms, to speak with some diverse associates, to speak with certain attorneys that work in a certain practice group, to get a better feel for the firm, to kind of suss out which one is going to be a better fit for you. So don't be afraid to affirmatively ask for those types of things, and then they'll try to make people available to you if they're willing to do so. And then secondly, don't disappear once you have an offer, or if recruiting professionals from law firms are reaching out to you. Sometimes we have students who literally don't respond to either say that they have an offer or what their status is. And that is also very, very off-putting and very unprofessional. So under no circumstance should you completely disappear. Even if you're doing great and you've got 1 million offers, you should still, tell people, thank you for consideration. I'm not interested, or I've taken another opportunity.
And, that has multiple benefits, because it's possible that the place that you do accept the offer at, things don't go as well as you would like. And maybe they don't extend an offer of employment, or maybe you don't want to be at that firm after your experience. If you've burned a bridge by ghosting the other firm, you're not going to have an opportunity to reach out and say, I summered here, it was fine, but I'm still really interested in you. Can I come in, or can I, explore an opportunity? And the firm may, because they wanted you so badly before, may just say, sure, come. And so don't kind of get in your own way there by not following up.
3 more questions. The next one is, as a part-time law student with years of experience, professional experience, the student is wondering, are big firms partial to full-time students because they've had the opportunity to participate in some of these summer associate programs compared to part-time students who are still working their normal job in addition to going to school. So how can a part-time student stand out despite not being able to participate in some of these summer associate programs?
I will say, and then I'll kick it over to Roy. I think that I've never heard someone say anything negative in a hiring committee meeting about a part-time student. A lot of it is what school were you at? What were your grades? The thing that people are really going to value, though, is that you have that experience, because our jobs are so demanding that you can work a full-time job and get through law school says that you could probably handle what it is that we do. So I wouldn't count yourself out because you can do, because you're not doing the typical process. A lot of people I've seen really value, military service, all kinds of other things. A lot of firms are looking for mature people, and you can play that up to your advantage. I'm happy for other people to give views, but I've never heard anything bad per se.
I agree completely. I mean, the reality is there is a little bit of a disadvantage in the sense that you have less opportunities to kind of have the social connection to people at a particular firm if you're not going through their usual summer associate program. But as Brittany mentioned, the work experience that you have by being kind of full-time employed and balancing that with law school, that gives you an additional hook that gives them confidence that, unlike other attorneys that they might be bringing in, you're someone who could probably hit the ground running when you come to the firm. You're going to be able to juggle all the things, all the demands that are going to be placed on you. And that's just going to be part of the story that you tell when you are communicating with these firms and, doing the things that Morgan and Jen mentioned about kind of finding ways to weave in what it is that you bring to the table that's going to kind of position you well to be successful and contribute to the firm.
The next one is when firms are considering a candidate, is there any consideration as to whether that candidate could potentially bring a book of business or clients, or is it more so just focused on what they've done in law school, what they've done, outside of law school in their community, or is that something that is factored into the consideration?
I have literally never go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is this goes back to, because I already know where Morgan's going, but this goes back to what I mentioned before about researching the firm, right? Big law firms have defined very specific roles for junior lawyers that come into the firm. They are not at all interested in people's ability to bring in business to the firm, because they have people who do that and do it on a very large scale and with massive clients. So that's not the role that they're interested in their junior lawyers playing. And so that's not something that you would want to present to them as a selling point for you coming in, because that's not what they want you to do. That said, there are other firms, smaller firms, but other firms that are much more entrepreneurial. And their interest is, from the day you walk in, they want to see lawyers who are hungry and are going to bring in business, generate opportunities for the firm, and they will reward that. You have to do your research to know who those firms are, because if that's something that you know that you want to do early on when you start your career, you want to match that up with a firm where that's actually going to be facilitated and encouraged. A big law firm is unfortunately not that place, just to be blunt about it. There has never been a scenario where any hiring committee I've been a part of recruiting has looked at a law student and said, oh, this is a really great candidate because they can bring in business. Like, it's just not a match with the model for how their business works.
Agreed.
I will say is that it makes sense for you to maintain those relationships that you have, because if you get to a different phase of your career, then that can matter. But I wouldn't even say that going in. And then the only thing I will say I've ever seen is if your parent or someone that is really tied to you is a big deal at a client of the firm. And even still, it's very delicate in how you sell that.
Yeah, Brittany literally took the words out of my mouth. And this just goes to thinking about the optics, right? So if you were to come into an interview and talk about your family business, right? Your family has a business and you went to law school because you wanted to learn the skills to help your family, but now you think you want to work in big law and get the experience. What does that say? It's that it could signal to a young, scrappy entrepreneurial firm, or not a young firm, but a scrappy firm. Oh, great. This person comes here, they'll bring their family business and that'll be their book and that'll be great. But to a big firm, what it really signals is, okay, this person wants to come and learn how to be a lawyer, and then they want to leave so they can be in-house counsel for their own family business. So it doesn't always play the way you think it's going to play. And then unless, like Brittany said, which I have seen, you know, you're part of a family that's already a client of the firm, and all that does is, you know, you're being slid into an opportunity because they know that that's going to in which case you probably doesn't matter what you're doing in OCI because you're probably already good. So
but let's be clear, let's be honest though, that is rarely us.
Correct.
Right. Which I certainly hope somebody on this call is hooked up in that manner. Godspeed, God bless.
That question also makes me think that what size business are you talking about? Because you also, when you're going and talking to these firms, you want to make sure that it's clear that you understand the economics of things. So if you're going into a Goodwin or a Latham and you're talking about a book of business, one, we very well might laugh because our deals are in the billions. So we're going to get millions on millions of fees. So if you're saying, oh, I can generate a book of $700,000, $800,000, that is impressive as a law student, but it is not, as Roy said, within the firm structure. And you're showing me that you're not thinking within how the firm operates. So then I'm questioning your judgment, and you don't want me to do that.
Got it. Thank you. The last one is it professional to reach out to an interviewer later on and connect with them on LinkedIn, even if you didn't, let's say, after having a call back, secure the offer? I remember, Morgan, you talked a bit about you'll continue to do this even if you're, you know, in the future, if you're going to lateral. So should students, or I guess applicants, be considering building on those connections and maintaining them?
I mean, I would say it can't possibly hurt. Like, I mean, first of all, you have nothing to lose by adding people on LinkedIn. The vast majority of attorneys just will add you because it's free. Why not? It kind of feels more affirmative to reject someone on LinkedIn. That's like pretty aggressive. However, what you do with that is going to be what makes it valuable or not. Just having 800, 1,000 to 1,200 people on LinkedIn. It's going to be what you do with it. I do think if you imagine that an attorney is doing 2 days or 1 day of back-to-back 20-minute interviews, they don't necessarily, and unless you two had like a vibe, I wouldn't necessarily expect that the interviewer is going to then strike up a relationship with you simply because they interviewed you at OCI. So, but the people that you had a very good vibe with and a good rapport, then you should build on that, even if it doesn't go, where you want to with the firm. And then it'll be on you to try to cultivate that relationship.
I think someone asked us about COVID.
Yeah, I saw something pop up. Don't ask firms how their finances are now that there's been COVID. That's another don't ask about pay cuts.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask about any of that stuff. I will say though, I think the general, others can shout if they disagree. I think class sizes are definitely going to be smaller this time around. So it's going to unfortunately be a more competitive market, which just emphasizes everything we've talked about today, that screening interview, like that initial 20-minute interview, they might have, your screener might be doing 12 of those in a row, and they might only be able to call back one person. So you gotta nail the screening interview. It's going to be really important. But yeah, I think class sizes are going to be, I certainly know at my firm, class sizes are smaller, definitely.
And see, at mine, I don't think we're cutting right now. So I think that just reminds me, there are things floating around like, oh, did this firm take PPP money? That's not necessarily a measure of the firm's health, because in the beginning of the year, they could have been doing something with their books. People don't understand how firm finances work. But if you see a firm that has done cuts in salary and you haven't seen them go back up, you've seen a firm that, you know, in the industry is like letting people go, you know, you might not want to bid there. I'm not saying don't do it, but you want to kind of look for the health of it. And also different industries are doing well. So be industry focused. So I think this year alone, in my side of the fence, there's been $131 billion raised in IPOs, transactions, and people going public. Securities is busy. If you're going to a shop like that, then you might be okay. You go into a bankruptcy shop, probably okay. But, you know, the other industries have been up and down.
Yeah, 100%. Like M&A was super slow. Yeah. I'm in, you know, bank finance. I was busy as hell this year.
Yeah.
Well, you know, matrimonial, we didn't slow down. All these people locked in their houses, miserable. But I actually want to make a point here, because I did see one of the questions with respect to a 3L for postgraduate positions who you can also do OCI interviews as a 3L. And I just want to make the overall point. This is really just going off of what Roy was saying at the end of our presentation, which is, you know, I graduated in 2010 during the recession. My first summer was in 2008, which was like still the heyday and things were fine. And then 2009, things were in the toilet, and firms were not hiring. Firms were rescinding offers. I got hired not through OCI, but through a diversity scholarship program at my firm. I've been there my whole career. And a lot of my friends, a lot of my Black friends at law school were not hired through OCI, or had solid firm jobs through OCI at banks or other law firms, and then their jobs had disappeared by the time it was time to start, or by the time it was 3L year, because the economy had just fallen out. My husband, who went to law school with me at Fordham, you know, he got his job as a 3L through OCI, just because the circumstances at the time were completely different, and just the way it is right now for what you guys are facing. And I just want you to keep in mind, this is not the be all end all of your career. If OCI and this hiring process and what happens in the next 6 months is not what you imagined, it is not at all the be all end all of your career. You can still go on to be vastly, incredibly successful doing something that you could never have even imagined, even if you don't make it through the screener and you don't get the call back. It's not the end. And I just want you to hear me say that, because law school, again, and you can probably see the experience that I had at law school, where I felt like it was just like a bunch of lemmings jumping off the cliff all the time with anxiety and like stress. And I just tried to remove myself from that as much as possible. And I just want you to hear me saying, like, in your head, if this doesn't go the way you want it to, it's fine. You still have to do the work and you're gonna have to hustle, but it is not impossible for you at all. One of my friends graduated. She didn't have a job at all because she had worked at Lehman Brothers. So there you go. Didn't exist. And now she's killing it as basically assistant GC of a massive hedge fund. And, you know, nobody's touching her. So just keep your mind open.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us, especially taking the time, knowing how much you all bill and spending over an hour and a half or so. Truly appreciate you taking the time to talk with our students. I know it'll be very helpful for them. So I want to wish you all a happy holiday season. To our students, best of luck with finals for those of you who are still taking them, and best of luck with your interviews at the start of the year. Look forward to seeing you in more events in the future. Thank you all. If anyone has any questions, I'll stay on after for a little bit. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jalen, and thanks, everyone.
Jalen, someone asked a question in the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to answer or if anyone left on the call could answer. The one asking about when firms ask who else you're interviewing with? Is it appropriate to answer?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. I think that's fine. Again, I think like there's a competitive, like it's good to know that you're in demand type thing, like Brittany and Morgan were talking about before. So you definitely don't want to be like weird and cagey about it. I think that's what would come off poorly, but I think it's totally fine to say, yeah, I'm interviewing with whomever. You can make it clear that like, this is my number one choice, right? Like the firm that you're interviewing at the time is my number one choice, but I think it's fine to answer that question. I don't know, Roy, if you disagree.
I mean, I don't disagree. I do think it kind of depends on the circumstances, in the sense that, if it's in the course of OCI, it's much easier to answer that question. If you're a 1L and you're just doing, kind of interviews where you get an opportunity, you may ultimately interview with a lot of different places, but you may not be interviewing with very many at the time. And so, you can kind of tailor your answer to not be cagey, but reveal, so for example, if that's the first place you're interviewing with and they're asking where else you're interviewing for, you can say, you can tell them, no others right now, but I, have applied to a number of firms and expect to, interview with some of them, in the future. That's fine. If you've already interviewed with like 6 firms, go ahead and say, yeah. And, you don't have to remember and rattle them all off, but you can go ahead and tell them. And then that lets them know that you're, there's enough interest in you that, that many different firms kind of called you in to meet you. So
I would say one caveat that I just thought of, if you're interviewing, like for instance, in New York or something, and New York is kind of like your backup because, the New York market's big and there's a lot of positions, and where you really want to be is Atlanta. So you're also interviewing at a ton of Atlanta firms. In that situation, I would not tell the New York firm that you're interviewing at a bunch of Atlanta firms, because their first question is going to be like, oh, this person wants to be in Atlanta. So just be cautious of like that. Or, if you're interviewing with a huge firm and every other firm you're interviewing with is a super small firm, same issue. So just in that sense, be a little bit careful. But if it's like, a Latham, a Skadden, a Kirk, like whatever, kind of all the same type tier and have multiple offices, then I think it's fine to reveal.
I was can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I was the one who asked that question. I just want to provide a little context. I'm a 2L, and I was fortunate to have like 2 interviews for my 1L. So I felt like when I was asked the question, because I had a lack of other firms that I could say when I was asked the question, it might have made me look bad. I know getting a 1L firm job is very tough. So I know it wasn't a knock on me, but I was just wondering, does that question come up in OCI as well? And would it be looked as a negative if you couldn't start naming off all these other places you're interviewing with?
I think to Roy's point, like there's a way you can kind of answer it to make it clear, like especially if you're early in the process, you can definitely say like, oh, I've applied to mostly New York. If you're interviewing in New York, like I've applied to, almost all New York firms, places like blah, 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 waiting to hear back, but should hopefully be hearing things in the next couple of days or whatever. You can kind of try to keep it vague. I think that's probably the best. Like I wouldn't say I have nothing, but I would try to just keep it vague and say like, this is where I've been looking.
And that question is, I would say it's a little bit unique to interviewing with 1Ls, because what you have to remember, and you kind of referenced it, firms hire very few 1Ls. They may have like 1 or 2 people that they bring in as 1Ls. And so sometimes what they're trying to get a sense of is, we have a lot of people we could pick from. Does this person have a whole bunch of opportunities? And that might affect whether we think, oh, we want to extend this, 1L opportunity to this person over here, as opposed to this person that's, gotten all of these interviews. And so I don't really think it's likely that in OCI, people will ask, who else are you interviewing with? Yeah. Because they're just going to assume you're interviewing with everyone, just because of the nature of how OCI works.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there was another question, I guess, about being formal. So where do you draw the line for the interview becoming too informal while still showing the true you? So I don't know, Roy might disagree with me on this. My approach was always like, I am going to be the most professional, covered person you have ever seen in your life until I have an offer in hand. And then okay, like I can let my guard down a little bit, but like I'm just here to get the offer, and then we can like worry about whether or not I can be my authentic self at this place. So that's probably like an overly conservative approach. But I just didn't want to be in a situation where I lost out on something because I let my guard down, or because I like felt, you know, they felt like I wasn't being professional. And there's obviously a question, again, once you have the offers in hand, then you can be like, do I even want to be at a place where I don't feel like I can be myself? And that's a decision that you can make once you have the offers in hand. But like your primary goal should just be getting the offers and doing whatever it takes to get them so that you're in the position where you can be deciding between firms. I think to the specific question, though, like you can absolutely bring in personal stories to answer interview questions 100%. Now, obviously use your judgment, right? Like don't talk about a personal story from the club, but like aside from that, I mean, that's totally fine to weave that in, especially if you think a personal story, whether it be like you mentoring you know, your little brother or whatever it is, like that can, if that's going to tell the story if that's going to get the point across that you're trying to emphasize better than a professional story, definitely do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, you kind of have to use your judgment there, but, you know, if there's some aspect of the personal story that you think makes you look unprofessional, then you have to ask the question of whether what you're trying to convey is as significant as the unprofessionalism that it might kind of portray, right? And if you have some concern that that might be the case, it's probably not a story that you want to use, right? Doesn't mean you don't use personal stories, but there may be a way to tell the story without revealing the part of it that could appear unprofessional, right? Then you're just, you know, because what you're trying to highlight is a skill or, you know, something that you did, you know, you don't have to like set the scene, right? It could be a story from the club, right? It could be you were trying to figure out how to get in. You and your boys were there. You were trying to figure out how to get in. They don't have to know you were at the club. You could say, and I'll tell you, this is how this skill gets developed. You can say, so I have experience working with the team to solve problems. You know, for example, we encountered a challenge and, you know, no one was stepping up with any ideas for how to address it. And I brought everyone together and I said, we need to discuss how we're going to address this. We came up with pros and cons and we identified a path forward and we executed on that. And if I hadn't brought us together to go through that process, we'd still be trying to figure out how to solve the problem. Boom. They don't know that's from the club. All they know is you got it done.
Yep.
And I mean, that's the game.
Thank you, Roy and Jen, for staying on. If any other student has a NBLSA or any kind of question for me, I'll stay on for a few more minutes. I know there were a few I responded to in the chat privately, so I will get to those as well. So Roy, Jen, thanks again. Truly appreciate you for taking the time and being with us tonight.
No worries.
No problem. Take care, y'all. Good luck.